Welcome into Daggerheart characters. If you haven't seen it, the first part of this video is already out there, where I show you a Gunslinger class for a warrior and a guardian build. Obviously, both of them like more tanky versions of being a gunslinger. In this video, we're going to be looking at like another warrior build and the rogue build, and like what the comp of the warrior build is to the rogue. If you want to be shooting from far or a very far range away compared to very close. So one thing right off the top to know about firearms, if you want to go with the rogue, if you want to go with the aesthetic of shooting from far, the very far range, is that technically you don't get that kind of firearm until 5th level at the earliest. They are 3rd tier weapons. Up until then, if you want to use the blunderbuss, you'd have to use that from close range, or you just have to have a different fighting style until that point, or you could homebrew something. But I'm working within the realms of what they offer within the game in terms of my decisions for this build. Something else for firearms is that they have a reloading feature, which has a 1 in 6 chance of eating up one of your stress in order to allow you to use the firearm again. So, with that in mind, low stress is going to be what really works for the Midnight and Grace domain. We're not going to be eating into that stress a lot. We have 11 stress, which you would see is actually less than in the other video, but that's definitely okay because, once again, we just aren't going to have to access our stress as much for features or in terms of moving domain cards from our vault into our loadout or anything like that. What you will catch on to is that this version of the Gunslinger is going to be very sneaky, very squishy, very evasive, ultra evasive, provide you some consistent but bursty type of damage, and plenty of investment in our experiences. As with all of these builds, went mixed ancestry, and I started with the humans version, high stamina, which gives you an extra stress slot. Because once again, having stress is going to be important in order to allow us to use our firearm reliably. And the other feature that I took was Unshakable, which we will look at, because I can't remember that off the top of my head. We've come from the Wildborn community. We'll look at that in a little bit. Subclass, of course, is going to be the Nightwalker. Is going to be the best fit here if you're going for the Gunslinger build. For the traits, we went with Finesse +2. Obviously, that's our spellcasting trait and our attack trait. +1 to Presence, +1 to Agility, -1 to the Strength. And our preferred equipment is going to be, we'll use this dagger at tier 1 plenty. And of course, you get like an advanced or a small dagger or whatever as well with this early on. And then or you could go with the shield with this early on because you are quite squishy. But in the early levels, honestly, you just get more squishy as you go because we're not going to be investing in our hit points as we go. So it's kind of okay to be a little bit more squishy early on anyways. So that sense, this scaling of the rogue into the gunslinger works fairly well because we will have to play, attack from closer range earlier on. In Tier 2, we got this Tyus Soft Armor, which is just going to give us a boost, a +2, to helping us to be quiet. So that's going to be one of many bonuses we have to being sneaky, to being quiet, to not getting caught, which just makes, our squishiness a little less scary. Tier 3, we grab our Buckler. Tier 4, we grab a Magus Revolver. So what I would say here, if your GM works like I suspect something about how equipment should be handed out, what I do is when I build creatures is I just give one item from each tier to work with. I think in the case of like, hey, I want my tier 4 weapon to be a gun, well, let's give the black powder revolver at tier 3 at 5th level, and then you just exchange that with somebody, trade it in, and spend some money in order to improve that up to a Magus Revolver once you reach your 4th tier level of play, if that is the weapon of choice that you wish to have, is what I would do. So right there, Black Powder Revolver at level 5 or tier 3 to be upgraded at 8th level. That's how I would handle that if I was a GM, and what I would ask of my GM for if I get some sort of choice in my gear selection, my equipment selection, which if you're making a gunslinger, you better have some sort of say in that, because otherwise there's no guarantee that you're ever going to find any kind of firearms in your campaign. Outside of that, I do have builds for all 4 of the Gunslinger builds on this word sheet that is out there on the internet. Link up in the description to it if you would like to follow any of the class builds from these videos. It is all written out there of the decisions that I made when I made them, and especially in the case of the rogue, a few areas where it's like you could make whatever decision you want. Ultimately, here's the ones that I suggest the most out of those in some instances, whatever. So, like I said, squishy, minor damage of 18, major damage threshold of 18, severe damage threshold of 28. We did invest a little extra, I think, here. No. We just invested in our finesse and our presence for this build. That's all that we needed. We have this baseline of 16 evasion, but that's almost always going to be higher. I'll show you that in a little bit. And then we just have these 5 armor right now. And I don't think that that improves once we... I do not have the buckler active, so why don't we do that? I'll show you that first, because... Okay, there we go. We're ready for that. Here's the bonus from the soft armor to move silently. And then when we add the buckler in here, you will notice, yeah, same armor, the evasion immediately jumps up to 21. And that's not a guaranteed thing, though. That's if I spend an armor slot, then it jumps up to 21. I don't know why they decided to make that the default instead of like having an option that I have to press in order to use it. But as you see, when you are attacked, you can mark an armor slot to gain a bonus to your evasion equal to your armor score. So we got a +5 bonus because that's our armor score, is 5 to the evasion from 16 to 21. But it does not end there. Remember, we are a rogue. Rogue feature, spend 3 hope to gain a +2 bonus to your evasion score until the next time an attack succeeds against you. Well, we're continuously making this last longer and longer. So now we're up to a 23 with the evasion score. And we also have eventually Shadow Hunter, which is an 8th level card, which will give us a +1 bonus to our evasion, up to 24. So, of course, the rogue gets the cloaked feature, which is just an advanced hidden feature, and allows us to do some burst damage with our sneak attacks. So by the end here with our Magus Revolver, we're able to invest in our proficiency with this build. So we're going to do 66, which would be 21 points on average, plus 13, plus another 14 on average. Yeah, at 46 there at tier 4, which does, pretty nice. So let's just do a test roll here. We get 36 damage there, and if we got a sneak attack, that turns from 36 up to 51. Look at that. So that's what I talk about. It's pretty consistent damage. We got a +13 here, and we have some additional burst damage that we're able to get into, but also it's 66, so that average also is pretty consistent there, around 21. We did invest also completely in our subclass. I did not really care to get this Dark Cloud feature, which is the second feature, not the foundation, the specialization, but we did want the mastery feature, which I think is giving us, is probably this, gaining a +1 bonus to our evasion score as well. And for the Dark Cloud, it does stuff to help us be more sneaky and everything. It's not bad, I just didn't find it incredibly necessary. And while you're vulnerable, add your level to your damage rolls. So if we are over vulnerable, that's okay, but wasn't really too necessary. We're trying not to be hit ever is the goal. Once again, once we get to that mastery, I believe it is, we get fleeting shadow. Maybe that's our foundation. And we have vanishing act, another way to get cloaked, clear a restrained condition. It's a pretty nice little feature there, just helping to our sneakiness. And Shadow Stepper is the one that we start with in our foundation feature, and this is a nice way for us to be able to move around and once again avoid getting hit too much. For Unshakable, oh yeah, so this was the big feat that works really nicely here to help our stress mitigation, or to help us regain stress. So when you would mark a stress, roll a d6 on a result of a 6, don't mark it. So the cool thing about this Unshakable feature is that it's going to trigger every time that our reloading feature triggers, which is the feature that causes us to pay a stress. So every time we do that, we have a 1 in 6 chance of regaining that stress immediately. But also, every other time that we have to mark a stress for anything else, we also have a chance of regaining a 1 in 6 chance of regaining a stress. And then, just to make ourselves all the more sneaky, we are Wildborn, which gives us Lightfoot. Our movement is naturally silent. You have advantage on rolls to move without being hurt. So we have advantage, we have a +2. We also have several features and cards that can help to help us use other features and cards that help us to make all the more sneaky. So there's obviously a whole bunch of your normal rogue synergy going along. And just to point out like how much of that is going along, you look at this, I have one non-Midnight Domain card in the vault, in the vault, and none in my loadout. With this build specifically, you could do like 2, 3, 4. You could probably about up to like 4 of the Grace Domain cards you could definitely grab, especially later on. But early on with this build, you're for sure using a lot of Midnight Domain stuff. Here's another way we can add a little bit of burst damage with the Midnight Touched option. So let's just look through our cards here. We got the Midnight Touched. One of those cards, you don't have to, it's not mandatory in my write-up about it. Yeah, I point some of that out. At a certain point, once again, you could start to invest more so into the Grace Domain cards. And actually, I did take another Grace Domain card because one thing I have not pointed out yet is the experiences. We invested in our experiences a couple of times. Once with a Grace Domain card, and we just increased our experiences at one point throughout the way, which gave us a +5, +4, and +3 to some of our experiences. We don't have a lot of usage for our hope either in this build, just like we don't have a lot of usage for our stress outside of, like the usage that we absolutely need it to be available for. So I think that this is quite nice to be able to give some bonuses to things along the way and just make this character more reliable outside of combat situations, stuff like that. And there is some more outside of combat utility for this Gunslinger, depending on exactly what you take with your early cards. Pick and pull, Uncanny Disguise are what I went with. I really leaned into the rogue aesthetic here, but obviously it could have been really any of the first level cards from either domain would also make some sense for one reason or another. And then we got Shadowbind. Notice all of these, to get them out of my vault, 0 stress, 0 stress, 0 stress. Draft Deceiver, 0 stress. Stealth Expertise, 0 stress. There's our feature that's going to give us even more sneakiness if we continue to need it, or if we're going on a stealth mission. Hey, you can never be too sneaky. This is a fail-safe, or if things fail, then we can mark a stress and like re-roll or something like that. I forget off the top of my head. It was right there, I know. Here's a way for us to spend some of our hope with Death Deceiver, make us a good liar, and Veil of the Night, which is why I didn't necessarily find it necessary to have like that Dark Cloud specialization feature, because this does some similar things, even though they are different. That's obviously better than this, but still same result in some ways. So those are what we've got in the vault. My normal loadout would look something like this. Shadowhunter, another feature giving us some bonus to our evasion and attack rolls with advantage in low light or darkness. So this is another feature that's part of why our evasion gets so high. Vanishing Dodge, just another way for us to escape in situations. Also helps us to get more sneak attacks off. Phantom Retreat, if so many ways that you can use this, but just another way with a character that only has 6 hit points, that we have an emergency release valve. Not only only 6 hit points, but our damage threshold is also very low for late play. Yeah, we do not want to be getting in any kind of fist-to-cuff types of fights. And we also have this Hush feature, which I think is very nice to have available, especially for against spellcasters and whatnot. So there we go. That's the Rogue. Then we have a Warrior class that really will be much quicker to look through. There's not much to talk about on that one. A couple of final notes on the Rogue notes that I have for the Rogue was that I made a decision along the way to increase the proficiency instead of maxing out the stress because, A, I could. There's little demand for stress, in part just because of how the Grace Domain and the Midnight Domains work out, and purposefully because of some of the decisions that I made in the cards that I took. And B, I want this character to hit as hard as it can when I'm hitting. I feel like that's part of the fiction of a gunslinger, is that you're doing some bursts of damage. The biggest drawback was, of course, how squishy it was and having to remain within close range until getting to a tier 3 firearm, or even closer than close range. But as I talked about, that is mitigated a little bit by the fact that we're not as squishy as it appears we are on paper at 10th level when we were playing up until, in tiers 1 and 2. So it's not as bad as it looks. We were able to just sneak up on our opponents early on and then run away. That's also, I should say, part of the reason why we invested in our experience, and we invested in being a rogue and doing the things that rogues do, so that way we can help in out of combat situations, or to prevent from a situation where we're sneaking into somewhere turning into a combat situation, by just being ultra sneaky and by having the tools of the trade to prevent traps from going off, to break into places, etc., instead of having to go through the front door. So those are all the kind of ways that we mitigate some of the drawbacks of having to wait until we could become that gunslinger, where we're using our firearm from, I think it's very far range, maybe, for the Magus revolver, whatever that thing's called. Let's move on to the warrior. The intent here is that this is just sort of a really evasive warrior with a firearm. It's not that it isn't strong or fun, but I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time analyzing my decisions on this one. There's some really nice synergy for gaining and spending hope that you can keep an eye on as far as we go over this build. To begin with, for the mixed ancestry, of course, we got our +1 to our stress, and we got +1 to our evasion, just making ourselves a little bit more evasive with this build. I did want this character to be able to go back and forth from fighting from a distance and fighting up close. That was just the vision I wanted. Is that optimized? Not necessarily, but that's a character that I would really like to play at some point. Subclass was called the Slayer for this one. Community, Ridgeborn. For the traits, we went with 2 to finesse, 1 to knowledge. We are going to use the same trick that we did with knowledge last time. 1 agility, 1 presence, and we're actually going to get more out of knowledge with this build than the other one. For our equipment, we'll start out with the dagger and the small dagger. And then at tier 2, we're hoping that we find a parrying dagger, which will be very nice for our damage mitigation here. And then at tier 3, we will get our black powder revolver. And we also will take this ember woven armor. So let's look at our equipment here quick. The ember woven armor is to help to make guys maybe a little less likely to attack us. We're definitely tankier than the rogue was, but it's not like our main goal is not tankiness here. So when an adversary attacks you within melee range, they mark a stress. And for the parrying dagger, when you are attacked, roll this weapon's damage dice. If any of the attacker's damage dice rolled the same value as your dice, which we were able to invest in our proficiency, so we're going to get to roll 5 dice, then the matching results are discarded from the attacker's damage dice before the damage you take is totaled. This can mitigate a lot of incoming damage. So that's how we're hoping that the equipment works out for these the features. Now let's go back up here a little bit, looking at some of our stats. So like I said, not as beefy as our other builds, but also not bad here with our 46 severe damage threshold, 23 major damage threshold. We did invest in our traits a fair bit here, so we're pretty well-rounded in terms of our trait rolls and having to make them. Our finesse and our knowledge were most important, but we also invested in the agility and the strength. Once again, wanted this guy to be fairly mobile, and so agility rolls to move around is going to help, and then also being Ridgeborn is going to help in some of the bad environments that we might run into. In terms of our evasion, it's pretty high. They're at 17. That's actually higher than the rogue was at the base level, although I probably have something activated here, I would assume. Yeah, our untouchable. We have untouchable because of the bone domain here. So that's helping, and that's part of why we got our agility up to 3 and invested in that, because that was part of the build here. So a very durable build, right? 10 hit points, 12 stress, solid here, and just, all around durable. 6 armor slots, so nothing fantastic there. But remember, when we are getting hit, dealing stress right back onto the opponents. And so we didn't get all the way into the proficiency here, but you know, the plus 23 baseline damage is pretty good there to be dealing some solid damage. Did not invest in our experiences. Once again, as always, going to remind you, I have this whole build with sometimes a couple of little side notes or something into some choices that you could make a little bit differently that I was close to making on some of these. But I have the whole build out there for you. In the description, you can find a link to it. So let's look at some of these things. So for the warriors, spend 3 hope to get a +1 bonus to your attack rolls until your next rest. So we can increase our attack rolls. Let's see, does this do a +2 or a +1 here? +1, so there was some synergy working with the other warrior that was getting a +2. I wonder what the heck that was. All right, so for the warrior, you know, we'll use this in both ways. We can use it to deal damage. We can use it to follow. We can use it to prevent from going out of our range, out of our melee range. This one is not. We do not have the reach benefit going on for this character, I don't think. Yeah, we went with the +1 in nimble evasion. And of course our combat training, which allows us to ignore burden, which is why we're able to... Well, I think it matters less in this build, but we do get that nice damage equal for our physical damage, that bonus to the physical damage. Some extra damage we get from the Slayer dice here. You gain a pool of dice called Slayer dice. On a roll with hope, you can place one of them on the cards. And the great thing here is that we can use this to for either the attack roll or the damage roll. So either way around, we can help our damage or we can help our attack roll depending on what kind of opponent we're facing and how, you know, which one we think is more important at that time. So we will be using our stress a fair bit with this build, swapping out. You know, they're not overly expensive to be swapping in and out a lot of these abilities, but you could have gone at, you know, other routes with some more expensive ones. Nonetheless, we're going to get cruel precision on this one again, so we're going to be adding this +5 finesse to this damage as well, as so that's +18 between that and the warrior feature, which is why it's 23, because we also get our +5 from the finesse at the baseline. So it's +10 and +10 really. Nope, that math didn't work out. Then I have Champion's Edge out here. When you critically succeed on an attack, you can spend up to 3 hope and choose one of the following options. For each one, you can't choose any of the options twice, but you can clear a hit point, you can clear an armor slot, or you can force the opponent to mark another hit point, whatever. Makes sense in the situation. Now, the big thing here is, you know, we only went +1 in the proficiency. The main thing that we're doing here with this build is we are just very, very consistently ticking away at our opponents, and we definitely have some nice, you know, decent burst damage potential against some opponents to force them to hit 3 hit points, mark 3 hit points. But a lot of the time, we just want to be marking hit points at the very least. So that's what this glancing blows are going to allow us to do. When we fail an attack, you can mark a stress to deal weapon damage using half your proficiency. And we do want to be able to use this regularly, so another reason why we have some extra stress mitigation with this build. And so one of the ways that we're going to be clearing some more stress here is through Swift Step. When an attack made against you fails, you can clear stress. If you can't clear stress, gain a hope. So that's nice too. If we have cleared too much stress, we can still get hope from it as well. Other cards that we have ready to go, I See It Coming, which can make us a little bit more nimble and evasive, especially at some of the lower levels. This is our strategic approach. So after a long rest, we get 4 tokens on here that can help us to give us advantage on attacks, can help us clear stress from our allies, and we can use them to add a little bit more damage, a little bit of burst damage into this build as well against some more deadly opponents. So we'll get definite use out of this throughout the entirety of the campaign. Another way to mitigate some damage coming in with our scramble ability, we'll be able to get away and back up to, which of course makes sense with part of the purpose of this build, to be attacking from far, you know, often enough. We also took recovery. This is another way for us to more regularly recover more stress because we can choose a long downtime move instead of a short downtime move, so more reliably recover our stress when we need to, or something else, our hit points, whatever is on the low. On the brink, when you have 2 or fewer hit points unmarked, you don't take minor damage, so we're just staying alive here. We're pretty able to stay alive. And Soldier's Bond, of course, gives us 3 hope. It's nice, and we were able to take it early on. And I'm sure we took Vitality along the way as well, as you always do with Blade Domains, because it just makes sense in almost every build. So that's how the Warrior builds out. I think we covered it all. Thank you very much for tuning on into this video. As a reminder, there was a part 1, so check that out. That should be maybe on the screen already. Bye-bye.